of matter, broadcasting to you on a Mars day with the ascendant on the degree of to kill and be killed of Scorpio, the 22nd degree, and my retrograde Mars. And Mars in 8 degrees Scorpio, Sun hour, with the Sun ingressing to Scorpio, ruling the 29th degree Leo, the honorific degree, mid-heaven. So this is a very important, as you can see by the election, it's a very important topic. It's a very important episode. Just to note, I was considering to call this astrological considerations for the foundation of a country, and might want to do a series about that, so we can all be exposed to why were certain independence declarations written in the timing pre-elected for those independence declarations around the world. And right now, it's on the news, is the Israeli study case. So the sun is just ingressed into Scorpio, and she's trining Saturn and the moon, which applies to trine it, and she is separating from a square to Pluto. So she's Pluto informed, ingressing into Scorpio, and and ruling the midheaven. The descendant is a degree away from Uranus, and it is on the degree where the massacre of October 7 occurred in Israel and Palestine. And just a personal note, how I felt that the sun is ingressing into Scorpio. Well, I found myself sharing a couple of times the fact that the people who committed group rape in kibbutz towards Israelis, who trafficked women within the army, who sent women, Israeli women, to be raped by Palestinian people in jail, would not hesitate to put entire families and their babies in similar fates within Israel and Gaza. And so I realized that something has changed astrologically, that I'm talking about this particular topic. And I'm like, oh, the sun is ingressed into my Pluto in 0 degrees Scorpio, shedding light on the mechanism of the sexual crimes and rituals operating within this conflict, and the taboo things that we didn't talk about, like atrocities of sexual violence within Israel towards Israelis, in the army, in the academia, in the everywhere of it, being committed and being a part of treason, basically, towards civilians as we progress to Agenda 2030. So I was like, the sun is indeed in Scorpio. And the next thing I'm talking about is actually a bit of a lighter form of discussion. And this is a technology that Israel has that pertains to the midheaven of Israel on Procyon. And I discussed Procyon a couple of times. We saw it in JFK's chart in the midheaven and Saturn, in the midheaven of the state of Israel. Okay, the election for the Declaration of Independence, it was pre-elected, of the son of Nelson Mandela. Okay, had the sun on Procyon, and the connection between Procyon to denuclearification, disarming, and the type of protection that is basically to avoid a war and to avoid a conflict or to avoid an explosion. And now I'm talking about the technology that Israel has been having, that is basically called Iron Dome. And this technology basically means if there is any missile shot towards the regions that the Iron Dome is set to protect, a missile from the Iron Dome will come to explode in the sky, targeting the missile that is coming, and doing it pretty much automatically. Okay, you can have women soldiers in the location that are not specifically trained for anything but just to operate this, and it makes self-defense a lot more accessible and a lot more equitable, and it operates by avoiding an explosion. Okay, so Iron Dome is considered one of the wonders that completely changed the game and allow Israel to continue on doing protection warfare rather than attack warfare or protection while doing attack warfare in ways that were not previously accessible in the world. Now, my argument is that the technology of Iron Dome is procyionic in nature. And so my argument is as follows. What Iron Dome does is protection rather than attack. What Iron Dome does is mitigating an explosion in the air rather than bringing it into exploding on land. What Iron Dome does through technology is basically mitigating a much harsher weapon conflict and protecting the people, which is moon related. Now I'm going to talk about Procyon, and Procyon is a part of the consideration, the astrological consideration for electing times to sign a Declaration of Independence. And Procyon itself is basically found in 25 degrees tropical Cancer. And my argument is that the way that the fixed star operate is real, and the motives are related to the sign in which it operates. This is compatible with the tradition of zodiac astrology. And if you think, what the heck are you talking about? Isn't all astrology zodiac? Absolutely not. There is Uranian astrology, there is midpoint astrology, there are types of astrology that takes only the aspects between the planets and even only the hard aspect between the planets as concrete event astrology. It's great, it has a lot of value. That being said, when I come to analyze Procyon, I do take the value of it being in the sign of Cancer. To start with, I'm going to present an argument regarding another fixed star, which is Algol, Beta Persei, or Medusa Gorgon. And Algol is in tropical and sidereal Taurus. And her story is basically of a woman that was raped and beheaded. Okay, and she was not believed when she talked about the rape, and then she was beheaded. And the punishment, her head was used, her hair was turning into snakes, and her eyes were so cold, and she turned into stone. And her talisman, okay, her head was used as talisman that would make any person freeze like a stone if they come to attack. Okay, and so while her story, as well as the mundane event that are associated with Algol, are of witchery to do, are basically ritual rape and murder. Okay, it's basically a witchcraft of rape and murder. Okay, a witchcraft can be to manifest world peace, and it can be to do such stuff. So for the talisman of Algol, and for the way we approach Algol in magic, is to shield and protect against that very particular type of witchcraft. Okay, and Algol is in Taurus, which is Venus ruled Taurus. Okay, the animal is the bull, which is fixed, which is territorial, and the Taurus, ruled by Venus, is ruling the voice, is ruling sensuality and your sense of safety in the body, pleasure. Okay, for example, your safety in feeling sensual or sexual pleasure, is ruling women, and is ruling relations as well as international relations, as Venus is the goddess of love and war. So the way in which Algol operates is basically, magically, is basically to protect the archetype of Taurus. And to win the protection of Algol, you must tend to, and if needed be, change any behavior that you have that is contributing to the rape and murder of women or men, okay? Or to the beheading, or to silencing even, okay? And so when you ask for the protection of Algol and Medusa Gorgon, for many people, they are practicing their boundary settings. They are learning about new ways to generate security and safety for themselves that they haven't been aware of. They are guided to talk about atrocities against women and so on and so forth, but not only against women, okay, any kind of sexual violation and stuff like that, or witchcraft, or the psychiatric tagging of people who went through violation or violence and are considered psychotic, while in fact sometimes these psychic attacks are actually seen and predicted and feeling what is happening or will happen in the world or could happen in the world. So this is one example in which there is a strong connection between the fixed stars and the zodiac sign within which they operate. Now, as to Procyon, Procyon is operating within the zodiac sign of Cancer. Cancer, the animal Cancer, is actually cannibalistic. And while Cancer can be very protective of its nuclear family, it can also eat it and kill it. And so Cancer sign is also ruled by the moon, which is very transient, can be moody. It is subjected to projections, and it rules birth giving, the womb, as well as caregiving and motherhood. And so, to win the protection of Procyon, okay, you have to treat mothers, you have to treat the people of your land, okay, both mothers, the people of your land, caregiving, okay, and fertility, the fertility process, whether it's conception or birth giving, with utmost dignity. So these are basically to treat your nuclear family well, because it is here to counteract the cannibalism of the Cancer. Okay, if you think about, I'm going to go through the JFK case. Okay, the JFK case, he was able in 1963 to avoid a nuclear missile crisis. And when you think of Russia putting nuclear missiles in Cuba facing the United States, that did not escalate to a worldwide nuclear holocaust with the maneuvering of JFK, who happened to have Midheaven and Saturn surrounding Procyon. That being said, the nuclear technology itself was developed and manufactured firstly, as far as we know, in the United States. And so it basically kept the United States from being eaten alive by its own technology, by an American president avoiding a nuclear, okay, holocaust. Okay, you get the wisdom of Procyon. It's making sure that we don't eat ourselves, that we don't become like cannibals. And when we tend to that, with the help and the guidance of Procyon, we can avoid a nuclear holocaust or a genocide of our people. Okay, Israel happened to have Midheaven on Procyon, and Israel was able to develop the Iron Dome when it wished to protect civilians from missiles. So it was available for Israel. That being said, there are these considerations. I'm going to go over the case of Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela has his son on Procyon. Yes, my hobbies of speaking of people who are no longer here in the physical as though they are still existing because they're guiding us and are with us. Just that. But he has his son on Procyon, and basically he came from royalty in Africa, from the Xhosa tribe, but he also married a woman from another tribe. Okay, he came from one tribe and he inherited from his father his ability to stand up to the king. So when he had to combat apartheid that came from the outside, from conquerors, he was able to do so by tending to the ways in which ancient practices of marriage within the tribe are degenerating the race and basically breaking taboos of interracial marriages, and that assisted in countering apartheid as he was standing to what's needed for the African people to stop eating themselves alive and degenerating the race and leading to mass extinction. And thus he was able to tend to the inner cannibalistic ritual, basically, that along the generations become more and more cannibalistic. Okay, the nuclei, the people, what they were doing, they were actually eating themselves alive, and basically denucleify the extinction that came from the outside, which was the apartheid regime. Okay, he was able to immerse in what white people or conquerors or basically the opponent brought that was good for the African people, as well as change what was no longer and stand up to kings. He was not supposed to inherit the throne, but through the apartheid, he became the main leader. And to combine the community assistance, what people call globally as communism, but the notion of sharing things with the community is ancient, okay? And he was able to bring that and basically address what was eating people alive in these situations. And that is a part of the power of Procyon, okay? He was a procyonic leader, son, procyonic, on Procyon of the people in Cancer, okay? So now when you get to the ability of Procyon is basically protective by addressing that which we do, which is causing us degeneration and extinction, okay? The places in which we are cannibalistic without our knowing. There's always good reason for people to marry within their race, okay? Fear of assimilation, fear of traitors, fear of fifth legion. But if we overprotect ourselves, which is also Cancer's protection, what we end up is basically eating ourselves alive. And Gigi Young addressed the protective problem associated, by the way, with Iron Dome in her own video. So you're very welcome to watch Gigi Young and her very refreshing perspective on occult technology, the rituals that are done to preserve certain technologies, and the protection that sometimes we think is protecting the people, but was not designed and implemented to protect the people. Okay, that being said, if Iron Dome is procyonic, Iron Dome will protect the people. Iron Dome can be operated by a pregnant woman in the army that just needs to be there and, carry a weapon so she won't be physically attacked. But basically, just make sure that everything operates correctly, that the missiles are going and things are well, okay? It doesn't require her to necessarily be combatant, to necessarily, it really makes even security and protection equitable. It protects civilians, i.e. the people, which is Cancer, okay? And it explodes a missile in the air, targets and by surveillance, okay, which is an important thing. Cancer is also surveillance. So it's basically a good use of surveillance when it comes to not having a missile dropping on people. That being said, Procyon protection is still serving us by the merit of addressing the people, mothers, fertility, the womb, and the places in ourselves where we could be eating ourselves. And so it has its limitations. Just as with Algol, we need to tend to learn and grow to treat people right when it comes to survivors of sexual violence, to people with deemed as psychotic, to boundary setting, okay, the legitimacy for boundary setting, the legitimacy to say no, for celebrating our body and sensuality, okay, all of these things, okay, to not deem a woman who's, let's say, a belly dancer as a whore, with belly dancing is actually fertility dance, okay, so just like that, Procyon gives us his protection when we actually tend to the ways in which we are being cannibalistic. Okay, what is it that we do to protect ourselves that is actually killing us? Okay, Procyon can both show us this and create the protection by avoiding the harsher conflict, by avoiding the extinction. Okay, and now for Israel, on the one hand, the desire, the use to protect civilians allow the formation of this procyionic technology to exist. Okay. That being said, it must not be abused. Okay. When women and children are sent to basically be raped and murdered with their babies by the same security people that were doing the same things to Israelis within army, within, sending them into the jails of prisoners and so on and so forth, then we basically are being cannibalistic. And so Iron Dome can only do so much. What we need is a procyionic wisdom to be emanating from the situation that tackles the core of our inner cannibalism. It's true to any people's nation, international organization, whatnot, and avoids a mass extinction. The midheaven of Israel is on Procyon. Okay, Israel was formed with the raison d'etre of doing just that. Now, that being said, the people who elected these charts had their own view of occult, and sometimes they just wanted the protection of Procyon. It's like, hey, denucleify us. Hey, make nuclear peace. Through the use of this country, which is not a bad thing, but you also have to treat the people well. If you believe that not all people can be free, while it can be holding, the belief that not all people can be free can simply be, well, children need parenting until they are able to consent, and they need teenagehood, and so on and so forth, while the belief that not all people can be free can justify slavery. Okay, and thus be cannibalistic. Okay, slaves are literally found in your 6th house of every natal chart. And if you have slaves, or if you are of origin of country where the other country has other people who are slaves to this country, or oppressed or colonialized even by this country, this causes ailment. Okay, 6th house is also the house of physical ailment, and it is on the axis of the 6th and 12th, which is physical and mental ailment. Okay, and so this is perhaps why a lot of people who are mentally ill were seeing things that did not know how to explain, and some of these were atrocities that maybe are happening, within and outside of their country, and instead of speaking up, they were bombarded with pills to kill them. But this only causes mass extinction. It does not tend to the nuclear issue, and to do Procyon and receive the protection of Procyon, we do need to tend to the nuclear issue. Otherwise, we have mass extinction. Eventually, what happened to Israel on the process of the 2030 agenda is the sense that the country was sold and basically does not operate as a country. Okay, people vying hours for a helicopter to save them, for somebody to come, people being evacuated and then thrown out of the hotel into nothingness, and of course people being sold, betrayed, and what happened in the 7th of October, okay, hours and hours of the breach of a border that nobody tends to for hours or hours. It also happened in 1973 in the Yom Kippur. Okay, this is not Israel. This is any nation. Okay, and so when we are being cannibalistic towards our people, when people in Israel were not housed for generations, when veterans in Israel were not housed for generations, for mothers were having their children being torn from them instead of providing assistance, and while children were looking to go out of an abusive house, they were either taken to another abusive house or they were turned by force to the abusive house by the welfare. When people who are exiting violence are considered psychotic, when they come to when they sense things that they don't even know how to interpret, and some of them are premonitions. Okay, I literally know people who have had premonitions as to what happened in the 7th of October. It's only afterwards that I realized that that's what it was, and they tried to warn people. And some of them were not trying to warn people. Some of them were maybe part of the planning of it, but some of them had premonitions. Okay, so when we're not tending to our people, when we're not respectful of our parents, when we're not respectful of caregiving, even Iron Dome technology has its limitations. Eventually, people are unfortunately slaughtered in their homes and kidnapped. Whole families with the babies. Okay, this is the nuclear family. Okay, this is where the protection of Procyon cannot be separated from caring for the people, the families, the mothers. So what we are seeing is this great technology, this great ability, and there was raison d'etre to for Procyon to allow the development of Iron Dome, because in pragmatic way it was protecting civilians for a while and still does. That being said, to actually gain the protection of Procyon, we really need to tend to the people who are not housed, to the mothers who are trying to get their children away from the predatory parent that is raping their children. And as well as what is happening to our children when they're being sent to the army. If they are being trafficked, it's not just an Algol matter, it's also a Procyon matter, because it's happening within the homeland. Okay, so yes, the Procyon has the ability to denucleify a region. Okay, and you see that there is a lot of mercy and that there is a lot of grace, but this grace and mercy cannot be on the account of people who are not being housed, who are being betrayed, who are being preyed upon for just being, and thus crises occur and they become wider and wider and wider and wider and more encompassing, so much so that worldly we are dealing with the issue of Agenda 2030, social credit score. We basically are tending to a situation where the lowest common denominator for a regime for the people is what's going to be enforced. Okay, if social credit score works on so and so billiards of the world population, it's going to be the lowest common denominator for the entire population, unless we tend to our people as global society, or at least tend to it. Okay, because those reinstation of even Agenda 2030 are not detached from the governing of planets like Procyon. And if we understand that whether you are creating a settlement that is biodiverse, based on permaculture, based on inclusivity, understanding that your founders are people who survive trauma and sometimes they work too much and sometimes they sleep a lot and you don't know when is when. So it's like the neurodivergent people, what they do to maintain their lives, we're gonna have to look up to them because it's the only thing that's going to hold waters. Okay, it's the only thing that is an actual answer to eugenics and to Arbeitsmarkt frei. Okay, the things that seem reasonable, such as, well, sacrificing our sick people, sacrificing our elderly, sacrificing this, sacrificing that, ended up and extremified to apartheid, okay, which is interracial marriages, not marrying someone from another tribe, okay, and not standing up to the king, or ancestral relationship within royal families to maintain the purity of the blood, which basically degenerates the blood and makes them allergic to everything. Okay? And so the genuine answer for this, while not judging the previous mistakes of humanity or the previous things that were once true and relevant and later became more and more of a degeneration, we will have to have astrological considerations such as prominent places on Procyon. Now, the ascendant and the midheaven are gonna hit on Procyon, I think at least once a day. And so elections with the ascendant or the midheaven of any entity, okay, whether it's a settlement or a declaration of independence of people, okay, it exists on literally every day. Every day we have an election with something on Procyon. Of course, we would much prefer Procyon to be rising in the skies and the moon applying to it, just like a Procyon talisman. That would be the utmost best. But an election with something on Procyon exists every single day. Look at me, nothing is sitting on Procyon now, and I'm talking an entire episode about Procyon. I can still contact the wisdom of Procyon, okay? Even when the election is not. Yes, of course, I'm talking from a country who has its midheaven on Procyon. And so it is not just by the right election with the moon applying to Procyon that we get its protection. And this is what I think a lot of occultists like Illuminati, like Masons, were not getting to the bottom of because A, they were not having mothers and women in their lodges. B, they had to be secretive for a reason, but then after a while this gets stagnant. And C, they were allowing permeating perceptions of trying to erase, like, if you have a right to become wise like the womb, it's beautiful. But if you do that so that you can eliminate women, now you are basically cannibalistic, okay? And you need a Procyon wisdom to change that, to tend to that. Okay, we can all be stupid. Every one of us has things that they're doing that are stupidity, that are atrocities. This is not a blame shame game. It's more like a, hey, there's a light bulb here. Let's change what we do now because we can tend to it, and that's what it's about. And by tending to it, so much so as tending to it, we can literally avoid a mass humanity extinction. Okay. And so this is the Procyionic wisdom, and the wisdom of Procyon is not enough to have an election. It's also important to develop relations with the fixed stars that we wish to have so that our world policies and our behavior as humanity and as people is more and more in alignment with the type of protection that we seek to have. So to have Procyionic protection is good to ask ourselves, where are we being cannibalistic and how can we tend to that so that what we do to protect ourselves will not eventually extinct us, like what happens to the Cancer quality. So I hope this was useful. This is a shorter episode, a bit of a lighter topic relative to the other topics that Sun in Scorpio brings. And again, there is light within this darkness. There is light by understanding that it's not a blame shame game. Okay. Also, feminists, when they were advancing humanity, there were a lot of them had understandable hatred towards men. But if we hate man, then, and we say, oh, the phallus is horrible, or having a direction in life is horrible, or having assertion in life is horrible, then we're basically being cannibalistic, because being a man or a Martian is a part of being a woman, and being a woman is a part of being a man. And of course, there are queer theories, which are still, like, we all need to be educated by them. So that is the spirit of this episode. Okay, it's not a blame shame. It's more like, hey, you got a blind spot here, and so that we can all learn from our blind spot and gain the protection that we can absolutely gain and absolutely get. And a great point that Gigi Young was talking about was the issue of blood sacrifice. And it's important to understand, if we talk about Abrahamic religion, I want to talk about the story of Isaac and Abraham. And Abraham was basically guided by the divine, and he was told, take your only son and sacrifice it to me, which he was a bit hesitant, but it was not unusual for human sacrifice and baby sacrifice. And so he was putting his son on the, it's kind of like the place where you sacrifice. And then God stopped it, and the basically introduced Abraham to a type of divinity and a type of deity that does not ask for human sacrifice. That was one of the innovations of Abrahamic religions and monotheism, that says you don't have to have a million gods, you can just pray to me, and you don't have to have my picture. But the way it was taught is like, you are not allowed to do human sacrifice. Okay, you can sacrifice a goat. You are not allowed to have a picture of me, you can just turn to me. Okay, our connection is independent of the material plane as possible. Okay, and Jesus took it a lot of steps further. And so Abraham required for something of the physical that will remind him of the connection with God, and he was introduced to the habit of circumcision, which is in no way new or in no way of Abrahamic religion. And until today, people, even though their rabbis think completely differently, and I have approved this with people who are connected to Orthodoxy and high people in Orthodoxy, they don't think that sacrifice is in any way connected to God or to divinity. Is basically a pagan, I'm sorry for the word pagans, like in relative to the Jews, it's considered pagan habit that was preserved in Judaism so as to allow people the carnal connection to the divine that they used to have before, while transporting them into a situation where they don't need any mediator between themselves and God. Okay, this is the essence of the story of Abraham and Yitzchak. And so while that story got me to be atheistic for a very long while, it was actually a person who studied history of religion that explained that to me in that light, and I was like, oh, heck, I did not know where is that coming from, because I did not have the historical context. And that's another perspective of the Abrahamic story and of circumcision as a basically pagan habit and pagan ritual that's to do with bodily sacrifices and self-harm to create connection with God, which in many ways is outdated, and it's not cultural violation to say so. Okay, apartheid was not combated by adhering to tradition. Okay, it's the best sentence I can tell you. Apartheid was not abolished by adhering to tradition. It was abolished by renovating on that which was bringing up extinction in the tradition because it had become outdated, while preserving the diversity and the virtues of those traditions in the modern world. Okay, this is a success story. This is Nelson Mandela. It's not Shirley Youngblood. Okay, Shirley Youngblood being educated by a man who did it and spent 27 years in prison doing it. and learning from what he did right that I was not aware of. Okay, and he had his son on Procyon. So I hope this is useful. And praise and honor to Procyon, and praise and honor to the deities, were like the 22nd lunar mansion, Al-Qaid, Algol, that and Andromeda, that protect us from assassination, from any sort of misery, kidnapping, torture, and violation of boundaries in spirit and in matter. I bless you with this protection. And I bless us to be in alignment in our action with the joy of life that we all are entitled to have. So bless you.